Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Cooperative Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Good morning, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. Welcome to Everything Cooperative. You know, this morning, it's a beautiful day out here in the DMV. The sun is up. Everything is shining. Everybody's on pins and needles trying to figure out who is going to be our next president. I think I already know. But today, we're going to talk to Mr. John Holdsclaw, who's Executive Vice President of Strategic Initiatives at the National Cooperative Bank. And NCB has been the sponsor for this program for our 7 years. The whole total 7 years that we've been on, they've been a sponsor. John, good morning. How are you doing, sir?
Good morning, Vernon. Good to be with you again.
It's always a pleasure, sir. So we're going to talk about a subject that's becoming dear to my heart, DEI. What is that, and what's your relationship to DEI?
Well, thank you, Vernon. DEI I would say it's an emerging concept, but I think it's already arrived. DEI, as an acronym, stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think we all know what the words mean, but I think that in the context of the things that have happened in the world today, I think they are starting to gain more importance. And I think that diversity, equity, and inclusion now for many businesses is fast becoming more of a business imperative. It's no longer a soft issue where you've got one person in HR that handles diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. You're seeing more chief diversity officers. I think between the years of 2015 and 2018, more than 63% of chief diversity officers were hired by Fortune 500 companies, and just that 3-year period alone, which basically shows you the level of importance that Fortune 500 companies, business roundtable companies, are more or less seeing. And so the way I like to put it is the University of Michigan says DEI is diversity is being invited to the party, equity is being allowed to add songs to the playlist, and inclusion is being allowed to dance. And so I think that's about the most simple way to put it for a lot of folks who sometimes get caught up with the definitions, but not necessarily the concept.
Well, I like that because it sounds like they're talking about black folk. We're going to go dance, huh? We're going to have some music and we're going to go dance. Okay.
There you go.
So what, I don't know, 40 years ago it was called affirmative action. Did this take the place of affirmative action?
I think while affirmative action had its place in this country, I think it was, how do I say this? It was more of a need or more of a desire to answer some inequities in emissions and jobs and some other pieces like that. But I think DEI now has far more intentionality. You know, there's more purpose behind it. And not saying it wasn't before. I mean, I think IBM was the first company to start looking at this stuff in 1978 and in the early 80s when they came up with these affinity groups or employee resource groups where you had black employees, you had women's groups, you had LGBTQ groups all within IBM. And I think it's just grown since then. And I think with the tragic loss of life from George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, I think it's just risen even more so in purpose for all of these various companies. I mean, it's fascinating. For years, the Business Roundtable always wrote in their annual report, they talked about their stockholders, they talked about things of that matter. But now, for the last 2 years, they've had statements about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and now they're putting and making commitments to change with multi-billions of dollars dedicated to trying to combat racial inequalities in this country. And so I think you're seeing more and more of that. I know for us at the National Cooperative Bank, we've made our own a level of commitments that we plan to sustain. For example, we have a branch in southwestern Ohio, and there's a community college there called Southern States Community College, and we've established a minority excellence scholarship for students of color there. And I was surprised to hear, but also glad that we're involved. It is the first scholarship of its kind for students of color at Southern States Community College. And so we're obviously very proud to do that, but it's not something that we're just going to do one year. It's going to be sustained over several years, as well as we've established two historically black college scholarships working with the United Negro College Fund, as well as the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. And so, again, these are things that are just not one-off for us. I think these are things that we're going to be very committed to. I applaud our CEO, Chuck Snyder, who I know has been on the show several times. We did not send out an external statement. We did not send out an external commitment to change. And I'm not knocking other organizations and or companies that chose to do that. I think that Chuck's intention was to keep it in the family. And I think the email that he wrote to us internally really resonated with all of the staff. And I think it also established his support and his commitment and then what our commitment would be as an organization, because like I always tell people, NCB, like any individual that gets into this work, they go on a personal journey. And so NCB is going on its journey, or it's on its journey right now. So I'm really proud of the work that we're doing. Can obviously talk about it a little bit later. And I'm just honored to work with the individuals that I work with within the bank, as well as have the support of our senior leadership there at NCB.
So DEI, I like this: diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity is you're invited to the party, so it's a diverse party. Sometimes when I have gone to all white parties and I was the only person there, it didn't feel very good, okay, being the only one. So that diversity needs more than just the one token. The spook who sat by the door, I think, was the name of a movie back 50, 60 years ago. Okay.
Right.
So then you invited, that's the diversity, and then you're able to pick a song. You're able to put on the song. You don't have to listen to all of the other cultures' songs. And you're also then included because you can dance. So I like that as everybody has an opportunity to dance. You can dance if you so choose. So you have that opportunity. So I like that makes it very clear, this DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, what it is. And so then you went on to talk about what the bank is doing and doing it internally, not making a big fuss about it to the external world, but making sure you're doing it. And my sense when I walk around the bank, having been, like I said, 7 years now, having the bank support this radio program, I see it's included. Folks are included. There's all kinds of different folks there. It's not just from the majority culture, white culture. There's a lot of African Americans. I see Hispanics, lots and lots of women. I see some Asians every now and then. So I see that the diversity is a big part of who is hired and who's on staff there. How do you feel as an African American male working in the bank? Are you feel included? Can you dance?
That's a great question. And I want to just piggyback on what you said. I jokingly tell folks sometimes when I talk about the equity piece and I say, who can contribute to the playlist. And I age myself sometimes because sometimes I'll go back to who can bring a CD or bring a cassette tape, because a lot of people don't necessarily understand what those are anymore. So,
well, okay, you just aged you. I would bring the 8-track, okay, or the 45 even. The 45. Yeah. I'll bring some vinyl.
I got you.
Okay, go ahead.
Listen, I tell you, I my place in the organization is one. I am, if not one of the first or second black male senior vice presidents at the bank, which is something that I take as no small order or responsibility. And then in March, I became an executive vice president as a part of an executive leadership program there. Myself and two of my female colleagues were elevated to the EVP ranks. And I heard someone say one time, when you're an employee of color and you get promotions or you rise in the ranks, you become three things. You become a trailblazer, you become a spokesperson, and then you become I can't think of the third. It's escaping me right now. But all that's true. And I think that as a black man working, number one, in the financial services world, I'm now a proud member of the Stonier Advisory Board. Stonier Graduate School of Banking is one of the preeminent banking programs in the country, run with the Wharton leadership team up there at UPenn. All said, my graduating class in 2017, I had 214 graduates. It had 5 black graduates out of 214, and then 5 graduates from Africa. Unsure about the Latinx number. That said, it really bothered me. It bothered me that there were not more black bankers represented at Stonier. And so I think I forged such a great relationship with the folks there at ABA, as well as the person who leads the program, Perrette Bonner, who's amazing, that I guess they figured they put me on the advisory board so I could try to work internally to increase the diversity numbers. That said, I think NCB is a place where everyone is given the opportunity to grow and be supported. We, like any other organization, can always do our best to up some of the numbers in some of the senior leadership ranks, and I think some of those things are being worked out through our culture process and whatnot. But I think that I don't take my responsibility lightly as a black male in senior leadership at the bank. I do know it's important. It's important to all people in the organization, and I feel like I've been giving every opportunity, just like all of my colleagues, to advance as well as create opportunities for myself, as long as I'm able to put the hard work in. And so now, I want to see others prosper. I want to see others have the opportunity, Latinx, Asian American, other black employees at the bank. And I think that the Everyone at NCB program that we've established there is going to lay the foundation for that for a lot of individuals, as well as mixed with the culture sustainability work that we're doing, led by my colleague Patrick Canali at the bank. And so, a long answer to a very short question, Vernon, but one that I'm proud to walk in those shoes as that black banker or EVP at the National Cooperative Bank.
So thank you, John. We're getting ready to take our first break, and what I'm hearing you say is that being in a bank, you've reached the senior vice president level. It sounds like it's a very comfortable place for you. You feel as if you are included, and that you have voice in the bank to help things get along. You're a trailblazer, you're a spokesperson, and I would think that third thing is you're a consultant. You have to talk to other people about what they can do inside the bank. We'll be right back. We're going to take a break, and we're going to come back and talk about why are co-ops so able and ready to take on this DEI. What positions them? We'll be right back. Please don't touch that dial. Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes, and the program is Everything Cooperative. Information is power. WOL makes a great partner. And the National Co-op Bank and the folks here at Everything Co-op are bringing you information about co-ops so that you can have power. You can have power, but you only get the power when you put it into action. Like striking a match to gasoline. Gasoline has no power. It's stored power. It's when you put something to it. In an engine, it's in a spark plug, that little boom that gets this power to move. So I want to talk about the power of co-ops now, John, and I have it. Let me make this hypothesis that co-ops are better to handle DEI than the capitalistic business model, and that's the normal business model in the U.S. This is capitalistic model. So we have the cooperative model. And so it's a broad question, but why are co-ops better able to handle this DEI than perhaps other types of businesses?
Great question, Vernon. And I want to clarify one thing in our previous session. I said that, sometimes when you reach positions like I have had an opportunity to, you become a trailblazer, you become a spokesperson. But what I didn't end up saying was you never ask for any of that. That's what I meant to say. And just the point being that, it's just where we are in the business world. When a person of color reaches that level, they never ask to be the trailblazer. They never ask to be the official spokesperson or whatnot. But again, those are the responsibilities and tasks that they tend to take on. And it's something that, you can accept and move forward or not. But it's something that I've accepted. If my colleagues see me in that light, and I just wanted to put that last little piece there. So, listen, from a co-op standpoint, I'm starting to see a lot of trends across the country. I mean, obviously, I love all 7 principles, cooperative principles, and our board chair, Maury Smith, has talked about an 8th cooperative principle around diversity. But I think for me, my favorite is and always will be concern for community, because I really, do see myself as a community development finance person at heart. And so let's look at this from a...
So you went right to the 7th principle, that concern for community is your numero uno. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
That's my... Listen, I love the open membership and democratic member control, that one person, one vote could not be more important in this country right now. I'd probably say a second would be the economic participation and education. But hear me out on this. I think that right now, when you're talking about, in this pandemic we're in now, that 41% of all black businesses are going to be shuttered, 27% of all Latinx businesses are going to be shuttered, and 17% of all white businesses are going to be shuttered. Obviously, there's some wide gaps there, and I think that, for example, worker-owned co-ops could help bridge that gap for cooperators of color. I feel like from a financial inclusion standpoint, as we go through these tough economic times, credit unions, which are co-ops, can help serve these communities. I feel like as we look at an eviction tsunami that's going to be occurring here very soon, where people are going to be evicted from their homes for the lack of being able to pay their rent, limited equity co-ops can be a viable option to handle those type of things. And so I say all of these because I feel like more cities now, San Antonio, Houston, major cities in the country, are now hiring chief equity officers. Chicago, San Antonio, Houston, and they're doing this because they want to ensure from a municipality level that, again, that there's equitable access for everyone in the community, to business guarantees, to housing, to transportation and whatnot. And so I think that's a huge sign that there's an acknowledgement that there is a gap somewhere, and that the playing field is not level for a lot of people in some of these major cities. And so I've received a lot of calls in the last couple of weeks from major cities across the country who want to talk about limited equity co-ops. They see what's happening in the black and brown communities in their city, and they are trying to figure out how can we provide affordable housing and home ownership for these individuals. And so I think when you look at the cooperative principles, you can take every one and make a touch point to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think out of all of the three, I think equity probably is the one that doesn't get as much love as it should, because I think we get stuck on the diversity piece and the inclusion. And I often say that it's not my quote, so I can't take credit for it, but I always say that diversity is a reality, but inclusion is a choice. So, I can't change the fact that I'm a black man in America, but there are others who would dictate my level of inclusion into what I do, what they do, and vice versa, letting people into my world as well. So, I think that there are touch points for everyone. I think that someone, and I say this often, you cannot be trained on diversity, equity, and inclusion. At NCB, we call any of our learning labs or discussions, we call them discussion exercises, because I feel very strongly that you can't train someone to be an expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's something that takes time. It's a very slow process, and I always say that this kind of work is slow, intentional, and it's a marathon, and it's not a race. And I think sometimes people think when they attend one 3-hour diversity, equity, and inclusion discussion or exercise, that when they leave there, they know all they need to know. But that's just the start. That's just the start of a long journey. I've been on my own journey since 2017, and still continue to learn something every day.
That is great. So I want to go back and just make sure I got it, that you like this concern for community, and that's your focus. And what I have it, and I've learned since it was Papa Sin who works with NCBA on that first month that we had our program. He said that co-ops solve community problems. If there's no community problem, there's no need for a co-op. And in the DNA of a co-op is this concern for community. And that's critical. And that's one of the reasons I believe, like you, that's why co-ops are positioned to work with and solve this diversity, equity, and inclusion problem. This problem that has, for 400 years, has been a problem that too often America doesn't want to address, and that is coming out of slavery and the racism that the death, you said the death of George Floyd, I want to call it the murder of, the lynching of, hanging of George Floyd, and where we all saw. But the 8 principles of volunteer and open membership, democratic member control, you mentioned member economic participation. You put something in, you also get something out when there's a profit, and you have the say of how much you get out of that profit. Autonomy and independence, you have the say, you must have it. The reason I like co-ops first was education, training, and information. My mother was a school teacher. I taught for 12 years in my career, and I like the training that happens because it gives people the information that they need to make really informed decisions. And because co-ops have open volunteer and open membership, it's for everybody, and you don't have to have a college degree to get this training. I call it just-in-time training. And then cooperation among co-ops to build this ecosystem to really help each other out, and concern for community. Right. I got it, and I've never heard, I like you put number 7 first. I like that.
I just do. Because, again, I always tell people at the end of the day, my father had a similar saying, end of the day, no matter what I do, I just want to help people. And I think that's where that concern comes from. I mean, listen, you can look at the country right now and see where we are. If this election doesn't teach us anything, it definitely teaches us that we are divided. A good friend of mine who lives in Philadelphia, who is just a great friend, and I call him often and process a lot of these things. He said to me yesterday that this election did not make a political statement, but it made a value statement, and I'm still processing that. But it really did make a statement around the values of the country. And then he also gave me a great quote that his son said, that people vote based on what affects them and not what offends them. And that's true. That's very true. People vote based on what affects them and not what offends them. And so I think for all these reasons, I think that just like you said, Vernon, if you're a cooperator, you're in an ongoing educational piece. I think that DEI deserves the same level of effort. I think that, you can't read enough white papers. You can't read enough studies because, again, this thing is forever changing. And the day that we get to the place where we feel like we understand all things around diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think it's a day that the term starts to be watered down. And I'll say this before the break, is that the two things that are not there and should be are belonging and uniqueness. And I think those are two components that are vastly underrepresented in a lot of this DEI work.
It is. I like that, belonging and uniqueness. So we're going to take our second break here, and it always comes really quick here. And when we come back, I know you were on a panel that the most recent NCBA's Co-op Impact conference, and Monica Hughes Davies said, if you're not intentionally inclusive, you will be unintentionally exclusive. So it's intentionally inclusive or unintentionally exclusive. I want to come back and talk about the things that you learned being on that panel, about a month ago right now. We'll be right back, everybody. Please don't touch that dial. everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. The program is Everything Cooperative. We talk about the cooperative business model and the four cooperative sectors. National Cooperative Bank sponsors this program. NCB's mission is to support and be an advocate for American cooperatives and their members, especially in low-income communities, by providing innovative financial and related services. And today we have Mr. John Holdsclaw, who's the Senior Vice President of NCB, and we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, John, you chaired this panel on diversity, equity, and inclusion, a town hall panel. And what were some of the things that you got out of it? Or I like that you had the videos because I couldn't watch everything. There was so much going on. That was my only problem with that workshop. If there's a problem there was so much education happening. But what were some of the things you took away from being on that panel?
First and foremost, I want to thank NCBA for allowing me to design that whole town hall as well as a panel. They really trusted me with that, and I did not take that for granted. Co-op month is October. It was October. There was a big push around diversity, equity, and inclusion. The whole conference was themed around that. And so, one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to have for all the virtual attendees a DEI town hall where we basically, Doug O'Brien, who leads NCBA CLUSA, made some opening remarks. I kind of came in with a few myself. There's this incredible tool that we use internally at the bank called Minty or Mintymeter, Minty.com. And it's really like a web-based polling software. But what I found in a lot of this work, Vernon, is that, obviously talking about race and diversity and equity and inclusion sometimes can be a very complex issue. And so what Minty allows people to do is, in an anonymous way, answer these questions that we put out there. And so we had 3 questions. Why is it so hard to talk about race, racism, or racial justice in this country? What motivates you to want to talk about these things? And what can the cooperative community do to advance DEI? Because what you get are these very candid answers, and it can be frustrating when you cut the Zoom camera back on and then it's crickets because of the complex nature of the discussion. And so that was the first part. The second part was we had an amazing panel that I got the chance to co-moderate with Doug O'Brien. We had Maurice Smith, who is our NCB's board chair and CEO of Local Government Federal Credit Union, Monica Davey from NCUA, who heads their Office of Minority Women there, as well as Faye Tate, who runs the Chief Diversity Officer at CoBank out in Colorado. And then last but not least, Gina Schaefer, who's a great cooperator who runs several Ace Hardwares around the D.C. area. And I think Gina was a little hesitant because she said to me, John, I'm not a DEI expert. And I said to her, that's exactly why we want you on the panel. I said, because you're trying to start a program. I get tired of going to places and then all 5 of the panelists are experts. And then I walk out feeling worse than I did going in because of how much I don't know. But we wanted Gina to be there so she could talk about what her intentions were and what her plans were and what she wanted to do in the Ace Hardware. So to get to your question, what I learned is that no matter where you go, there's just so much commonality in a lot of these responses. I think people feel like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to insult anybody. I don't want to get defensive. I don't know what to say. They want to have these conversations, but they don't necessarily know what to say. And I always tell people, you can learn in that discomfort. I have a colleague, and he's probably tired of me telling this story, but he goes around the country in a pre-pandemic world and doing a lot of panels. And he said to me one day, he called me, and you could tell he was a little, not nervous, but just didn't know how to ask the question. And he said to me, when I go out and do these panels and whatnot, is it okay for me to say communities of color or black and brown communities? And I just stopped for a moment. And while, Vernon, you and I might take that for granted, I just told him thank you. And he said, why? I said, thank you because you came to me to ask me that question. I'm sure there was some anxiety. You might have been a little nervous. I said, but you asked me the question, and it's positively, absolutely okay for you to say communities of color or black and brown communities. And I think because those questions aren't asked, we'll continue to go through this world and be uncomfortable and not want to say the wrong things. And so that was an overwhelming thing for me, but not uncommon in a lot of this work that I do. But I also realized when I look at those individuals on that stage that there's already this incredible set of leaders in this space, that were on that stage. We may not always have access to them. We may not always be able to call them. But I think that the cooperative community needs to tap in to its already existing resources around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And hear me out, we need to start working to create the bench or the next set of leaders who have a greater understanding of these topics. I mean, be it millennials, be it Generation Zs, or whatnot, God bless us, but be it Generation Z, but we need to start educating younger cooperators about the importance of all of these topics, who probably will see them in a better light than we will because of just the generations and the way that they're coming up. I mean, I think Chuck, our CEO, always talks about the most that he's learned about DEI is, having his daughters in the back seat with their friends, with this whole diverse group of people as he's running them around somewhere, and you just hear the conversations. Again, they'll see things differently than we do. I just think that we just all need to take the first step, educate ourselves, ask the tough questions, and have the tough discussions. I mean, we don't have to always agree to disagree. I mean, we can always agree to disagree. Our DEI fellows, our fellows program, everyone at NCB and internally, we don't always see eye to eye, but we've created a brave space for all of us to have a conversation without judgment. And you can accept it or not accept it, but whatever we do, we're going to collectively agree to solve or address a topic that we're looking at. And I cannot say, in my 19 years of being in the NCB enterprise, how proud I am of working with these 11 individuals and our 4 advisors on this work. It's very fulfilling and very gratifying for me. And there's so much more to come from us on this. We're just getting started.
So what are some of the things that you're doing in the bank? I know you talked about the scholarships in Ohio, but what are you things to do to make sure that you have diversity, and you do? I can see that when I go to the bank. But people really feel like they can say, they have the equity, they can say, they can pick the songs, that their word means something that has value, and then they can dance. They are included in all aspects of what happens inside the bank, whether that's deciding on who gets a loan, or deciding what products happen, or deciding where you're going to have your cookout, or your whatever you're going to do for the community, for the bank, and outside of business. How do you make sure all that happens? What are you doing?
Well, I mean, Vernon, first of all, I think one of the biggest things that's happening now in the DEI world, and I learned this from a great Dr. Cornetta Robertson, who's now at Michigan State, a great organizational management expert, who said that one of her biggest concerns is that a lot of these DEI programs now are lacking innovation. Folks set up their council, they have a couple trainings, then they set up their employee resource groups, and so you start with low-hanging fruit. So you have the black group, then you have the women's group, and then they pat themselves on the back, and the rest is history. We wanted to be a little bit more innovative and not have a council. So what we have is a fellowship program with 12 non-executive members from across the bank, from our New York office, our Ohio office, as well as Virginia. And then, Chuck, our CEO, really wanted to give them some real teeth, wanted to give them the opportunity to make some of these decisions. And what we did was, and what I love about our program is that we established these advisors. And it's our CEO, our COO, our head of HR, and then another senior executive who handles our culture. And so we did not intentionally put a CEO or a high senior level person in the program, because what it does is it changes the whole dynamic of the discussions. I mean, it changes what people talk about or what they feel more comfortable to talk about. Obviously, we keep the advisors abreast of what's going on. We have joint meetings at times. And so the role that I play is that I lead the program, but I also serve, my greater role is serving as a liaison between the advisors and the fellows. And so what we've done is we had our first DEI town hall at the bank following the murders of Breonna and Mr. Floyd and Ahmaud. We have had 2 learning labs on bias. We've had open discussion on many other DEI-related topics. And listen, we don't expect all 300-plus employees to be on every one of these Zoom calls or every one of these discussions. We're looking at developing small groups. We're looking at coming up with, other opportunities for us to have these discussions. I always tell people, having an international potluck for diversity, equity, inclusion, in my mind, is not diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's just a potluck with food from all around the world, because there's nothing that I'm going to learn just from eating something from another country as opposed to me sitting down and having a conversation about, one of our board chairs had me talk to his organization some time ago, and the first thing he asked me was, what is it like to be a black man in America? And I told him what it was like. I told him what it feels like. I told him that, sometimes if you're not black, okay, I ask people sometimes, how many times a day do you think about being white, right? And they may say, not often, or I don't really know. But I'll tell them, I think about being black every minute of every day. Every day. And maybe that's the construct as it's built. Maybe that's my own mentality, but it's something. And I say that not to make anyone feel bad about themselves or get defensive or not what to say. In my mind, it's just an honest question. And I was so thankful when our board member asked me that question, and I was able to answer it. And, I have a 14-year-old son, man, and I saw a great thing that said, what is it, keep calm and carry on. I saw something that said, I can't keep calm. I have a black son. And so all these things go into the fabric of who we are as individuals. But I still feel like we've got to start having more and more of these discussions. The first thing I'll tell people is go online and find some of these glossaries and just read some of the terminology. Just read some of the DEI-related words to gain a greater understanding of what they mean. But again, it's hard to get people to do that. You might get defensive while you're reading that. All said, there's a lot more work to do, and there's a lot more that we all need to do while we're on this journey moving forward.
So it's awful hard to get anybody to understand being black in America, being black men in America, racism, and racial justice. How do you deal with all of that when every minute of every day, whether you're driving, walking, it doesn't make any difference. It's you're shopping and you see the guard following you, or you're concerned about getting pulled over by the police driving while black. So all of this plays into the psyche of a human being. And I've just gotten close to, John, this intergenerational trauma and how that plays on you, that you don't even know why you're feeling bad because of what happened to your mama, your daddy, your granddaddy, your grandmama, and all of that.
Huge.
So we're going to come back. We're going to take our final break here. We'll be right back and talk about why it's so important to talk about REI and what's the benefits from a business standpoint. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes, and the program is Everything Cooperative. And John Holdsclaw IV, IV, is our guest today. And John, I take it you went to a historically black college. You said the smallest one in the U.S.
No, you're joking right now. I went to the largest historical black college and university in the country right now, North Carolina A&T State University. And I can't express to you how sad it was last weekend, because that was going to be homecoming weekend, and we call our homecoming GHO, which means greatest homecoming on earth. And so you had a lot of sad folks last weekend who were not in Greensboro celebrating our homecoming. They are truly events that benefit us as alumni, but they also benefit the city of Greensboro, North Carolina, tremendously from a financial standpoint. In one weekend, it can bring in between $17 to $25 million to the city. So that said, we'll circle October 2021 on our calendars and pray for a vaccine and an end to the pandemic, so we can attend 2021 GO. So
October is your homecoming that you go back to Greensboro.
Yes, sir.
And October is also co-op month.
It is.
October is the 7th. This past October is the 7th anniversary of this radio program. And it's my birth month, so October is huge for me.
Oh, happy belated birthday. Good
yeah. And I went to Bluefield State College, which is historically black college. Unfortunately, it's the whitest college in America now. It's 95% of the students are white. They literally took it over. And too often, whites will take whatever assets that we do get, or they don't want to see us with assets. And that's one of the problems with racism in America. But what we really want to talk about here is, why is it so important? And let me set up with this way. I went to work out of when I got my MBA. I went to Cummins Engine Company in Indiana, so it's south of Indianapolis, right in the heart, coal country, Bible country, whatever you want to call it. And Cummins makes diesel engines, and I was the assistant to the president, and his name is Jim Henderson. Jim said, talking about affirmative action, it's good business sense. It doesn't just do it because it makes sense. And I mean, because it feels good, or you want to try to right wrongs in history. But he had a plant in India. They had doing work all around the world with all of these different cultures, and so affirmative actions for people, particularly African Americans at the time, made sense. But it's understanding the culture. So my question, out of Jim Henderson's words, the first time I heard this is 76, was that affirmative action is good business sense. It can come to the bottom line, sell more, make more profit by doing what's right and what makes sense. So do you find the same kind of thing with DEI, or why do this other than righting wrongs, particularly in America? But
I'll say this, out of all the components that go into this work, it probably for some people is the one that they struggle with the most, and so I'll say this to you, you'll have some companies, and I don't think this was it in our case. I mean, we went with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and one day, putting it out here, I like for it to be diversity, equity, belonging, and inclusion, to add to that. But I think what happens is, we say DEI as opposed to racial equity, because not us per se, but people say that because it's more comfortable. It's not, you say racial equity, it puts a different spin on it, number one. The other piece of it is, when you start to look at companies who have these programs, they'll say, well, what's the business tie into this, and where does the business piece of that? And so I'm not saying they hide behind the business aspect of it, but it's what they use to justify it. And so I think in our case, especially with Chuck, I think our CEO was very adamant about that people from an individuality standpoint were able to understand these concepts. Now, don't get me wrong. When you look at all the research, folks who feel like they belong to a company produce higher returns. 85% of CEOs whose organizations have a DEI strategy say that they have enhanced business. By 2030, a majority of young workers will be more diverse, and they'll tell you that diversity and flexibility are key to their loyalty to an organization. And so, we're going to add a lot of those things to our strategic plan. I mean, one of the things that we're doing right now is that it's going to be a big thing for us in 2021, is that we're going to look at our our vendor and our contractor list to see if we're working with minority women-owned businesses for some of the work that we do at the bank. I just feel like it's important. Our senior leadership feels like it's important. And even if we don't necessarily go with the companies because maybe they may be higher or they may not offer the right set of services that we're looking for, we at least want to explore. We at least want to ask. We at least want to be able to create these kind of lists and track the kind of folks that we're hiring. And so, I say all that to say that while it is very important to make the business case, and I can see us in the next year or so, because we're in the process now of writing a new strategic plan, there will be a diversity, equity, and inclusion component of that we will hold ourselves to as an organization, as senior leaders, as middle management leaders, and everyone within the organization. But I selfishly will say that right now, I'm more committed to my colleagues and their knowledge around DE&I. The strategic plan and the business case will come. It's just, I think, in my mind, something that we're not leading with, because we just want to let people know that this is an organization that you can have these kind of conversations and not be judged. This is the kind of organization that basically will show you the level of respect for whatever diversity or person you are and whatnot. And so I just think that we get so wrapped up in that business case, number one. And number two, and I think we talked about this some other time, Dr. Kendi wrote this great book about how to be anti-racist, and as I start talking to more organizations about this stuff, the very first thing they say to me is that, John, we want to be an anti-racist organization. And then I'll say to them, anti-racism is over here, and what have you done to get there? And they'll say absolutely nothing. And I'll say, well, that's a pretty broad gap between A and B, and I think that we all need to be careful of making those statements if we don't necessarily know what they mean. Dr. Kendi talks about either you're racist or you're anti-racist. There is no neutrality as it relates to that topic. And so I just think that moving forward, we need to learn from our mistakes. We need to learn from our experiences, because this is not something that's cookie cutter. This is not something that one size fits all. Some organizations feel like if I take a group of people down to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, or the Native American Museum, or the Holocaust Museum, that I'm covered. I'm good to go. I've got all my DEI work, and let's go on about our business of making money for our organization. And that's just not something that I think we choose to do at the National Cooperative Bank. I think we want to, again, be more intentional and be ready for the marathon and not necessarily the sprint.
So I get it, and I'm going to push back a little bit. So I have it that another reason that I like cooperative model is because of the values of self-help, helping self-responsibility, taking responsibility and doing what needs to be done, democracy, one member, one vote, equality, equity, and solidarity. But I like the ones of the ethical values of co-ops that the traditional cooperators believe in. That's honesty, openness, social responsibility, and caring for one another, or caring the golden rule. And I think in doing those things and having those values and putting those values in place, whether it shows up as diversity, equity, and inclusion, or that's just, this is what we do, this is who we are, is better for business. So being an entrepreneur, I'm always looking for what's better for business, but I'm also like the idea of having these values really, really, really helps our society, concern for communities, what you started off with, and it also helps, it helps the bottom line. I don't know how you measure it, but it really helps the bottom line because people feel better, like you said earlier, in coming to work and doing things and finding solutions. What do you think about that?
Well, listen, and I'll push back and say that all the openness and all of this and all of that is great, except when it comes to talking about racism, and racial justice. But I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying, Vernon. I believe strongly that, as cooperators, we have a commitment to want to talk about these topics because, again, they are intertwined in so many aspects of the cooperative principles. All that I will say in closing is that implore my fellow cooperators to be intellectually curious about this topic, ask the tough question, acknowledge the fact that you are going to make mistakes. I say it all the time, and that we do all have our own level of unconscious bias.
Take us out by telling us, do you like what you do?
I love what I do, Vernon. I think that I work for an organization that is mission-based. I work with a ton of great individuals. I think that, I'm a big believer, and I've learned this from my boss. You don't get what you don't ask for, but at the same time, if you come to work every day and you work hard and you add value, you'll prosper and be gratified in what you do.
Thank you, buddy. It's a pleasure having you on. Always great talking to you. Everybody out there, please live this week cooperatively, and we're all waiting to see who's going to be our next president. So live cooperatively and have a great week, and we'll see you next Thursday. Thanks, John. Thank you so much.